My father was quite a wealthy and influential man. I was very proud of my father. I learned a lot from him. But unfortunately, there comes a time when you have to say goodbye to loved ones, and this is a rather difficult period in life, especially when a wife tries to take away all her father's inheritance and go to her lover. Yes, Mrs. Worthington, I comprehend. Absolutely, Mrs. Worthington, I'll make sure to do that. Will this verbose, blue-haired elderly woman ever stop talking? Susan Morgan wondered in frustration as she endured the continuous chatter of the wife of the Birch Grove mansion and museum's board chairman. Despite her irritation as Birch Grove's development director, Susan realized she had no choice but to endure and agree with the elderly woman's pontificating. Susan, a young woman who didn't tolerate foolishness easily, felt particularly angered when others assumed superiority based on their family wealth. I've had enough of wealthy individuals who believe their money makes them authorities on others' affairs, Susan growled to herself. A glance at her watch heightened her frustration further. She was running late for an important meeting. However, just as Susan was about to interject, the elderly woman abruptly concluded her monologue. "Oh my, look at the time. If I don't hang up now, I'll be late for my hair appointment." "I understand, Mrs. Worthington. Apologies for keeping you so long," Susan replied, devoid of any sarcasm. After concluding her conversation, Susan hastily sent an instant message to her husband stating, "Having dinner with a potential client. Don't wait for me." After hitting send, she quickly organized her desk, checked her makeup in a small mirror, and briskly exited her compact office. Reflecting on the fact that the space was originally a butler's pantry in the Birch Grove mansion, Susan thought, well, at least my name is on the door. While making her way down the hallway, Evita, her Latina secretary, called out, "Are you leaving, Senora Morgan?" Without breaking her pace, Susan glanced back irritably and replied, "I'm off to meet with a potential donor. I won't be back today." Observing Susan's departure, Evita noticed the rhythmic sway of her boss's expensive suit skirt and heard the click of her high heels on the mansion's marble floors. Once Susan exited, Evita hurried down the hallway toward the executive director's office, stopping at Christina's desk. "Is he gone?" she inquired. "Si," Christina replied. "He left about 10 minutes ago. He mentioned an important meeting." Evita smirked. "Like clockwork. This week, last week, the week before. Both of them have meetings at the same time? They think we don't know what's really going on." Glancing towards the exit, she muttered, "Puta." The two young women chuckled and returned to their tasks. Professor Daniel Morgan surveyed the diverse faces in his Introduction to Economics class, acknowledging that only a handful might sustain a genuine interest in the subject. Nevertheless, he aspired to ignite a bit of intellectual curiosity, a task requiring an unconventional approach. With a tap on his tablet, a graph materialized on the wall behind him. "Today," he declared, "we're delving into the concepts of supply, demand, and price." A comedic groan from the audience elicited widespread laughter. Undeterred, Daniel continued, "I get it, it sounds dull. But these abstract ideas wield tangible influence in the real world. Let me illustrate." He picked up a piece of artwork, displaying it for everyone to see. "Anyone recognize this?" he inquired. A female voice chimed in, "Marilyn Monroe, by Andy Warhol." "Apologies, miss, you might be misplaced. Art appreciation is across the campus," Daniel quipped. As the laughter subsided, he grinned. "In all seriousness, our art enthusiast is spot on. So why am I showcasing an Andy Warhol piece in an economics class? The reason is that this very artwork, or one nearly identical, fetched over $195 million in a 2022 sale. It currently holds the record for the highest sale by an American artist." A few students whistled in response. "I assume," continued Daniel, "that none of you in this room was the buyer." This elicited a few laughs. "No billionaires here? Well, that's disappointing. Anyway, the reality is that at that price, only one person could afford Andy's Marilyn. Yet any of us could head to the university bookstore right now and purchase a Marilyn reproduction for about $20. So why do so many people buy at the bookstore and so few at the auction? It's all about the price. At $195 million, there was only one buyer, but at $20, demand skyrockets. Before you object, I acknowledge there are various factors influencing market demand for any product, commodity, or service. We'll delve into those in future classes. However, the undeniable truth is that price is one of, if not the most critical factors in determining demand. As the session concluded, Daniel was pleased to find several students approaching him with questions or differing viewpoints. At least I've got them contemplating the topic, he thought with satisfaction. Back in his office, he discreetly stashed the Monroe print behind a file cabinet before retrieving his cell phone from his pocket. Although he had felt it vibrate during the lecture, he adhered to his rule of not interrupting class to check. Upon inspection, he noticed that Susan would be unavailable again this evening. The frequency of such occurrences bothered him, but it did provide an opportunity to check on his dad. Since Ezra had been diagnosed with Parkinson's disease a few years ago, he insisted on managing in his own home. However, Daniel had observed his father's symptoms worsening, prompting him to visit more often. During their phone conversation, his father delved into a rambling discourse on real and imagined symptoms, incompetent doctors, and global issues. When Daniel finally inquired about dropping by, his father insisted he come for dinner. Despite Daniel's attempts to protest, his father interrupted, handing the phone to someone named Paloma. Paloma served as Ezra Morgan's live-in nurse and caretaker. As his father's health visibly declined, Daniel insisted on full-time care for him to stay at home. Despite the old man reluctantly agreeing, he drove away every caregiver sent by the agency with complaints, insults, and hostile behavior. Just as Daniel contemplated placing his father in a nursing home, Paloma entered the scene. Paloma possessed two distinct advantages over her predecessors. Firstly, she unexpectedly had a pleasing appearance, something that Ezra appreciated. Secondly, she remained completely unfazed by Ezra's bluster. If he snapped at her, she snapped right back. When he resisted following a doctor's orders, she persistently persuaded him until he complied. Even when he was irritable and curt, she ignored him until he stopped trying to unsettle her. During one visit, when Daniel checked on the new caregiver's progress, his father surprised him by expressing approval of Paloma. "She doesn't take any nonsense from me," he declared, giving Daniel hope that they had finally found a solution. However, those hopes were dealt a serious blow about 10 months later when Paloma called Daniel to inform him of her decision to quit. "It's my son Marco," she explained. "My mother has been taking care of him, but now my grandmother is sick, and Mama has to go live with her. Additionally, Marco is ready to start school, and there's simply no way I can take care of him and Senor Morgan simultaneously." If Daniel felt disturbed by the news, Ezra simply declined to acknowledge it. To Daniel's surprise, the elderly man proposed a solution. "Come and live in my house," he had suggested. "This place is spacious enough. Besides, you'll save on rent and commuting. I'll even contribute to the groceries." "But what about Marco? You wouldn't want a 6-year-old running around your house." "I've had a 6-year-old boy here before, you know. Besides, Marco will give me someone to talk to when I get tired of you nagging at me." She had visited Daniel's office to discuss the proposal. Once he got over his initial shock, he began to see the benefits. Along with the consistent care from someone his dad liked, Daniel believed that living in a family environment might be beneficial for his father. "It's your call, Paloma," Daniel had informed her. "I think it could be a good arrangement for Dad, and I'd feel better knowing he's being cared for by someone he likes. But you need to decide if it would work for you and Marco." "I believe it could work, Senor Daniel, but it would work better if you could try to visit more often, for your dad's sake. And Marco would love it too." Surprisingly, she had blushed bright red before quickly leaving the room. Her reaction puzzled him, but he was pleased when he learned she had accepted his father's offer. Now, after 18 months of the new arrangement, Daniel wasn't surprised to hear his dad yielding to Paloma's preferences. He was also content when she encouraged him to stay for dinner. Faced with the alternative of dining alone on takeout at his campus home, Daniel didn't resist much. In addition to her nursing skills, Paloma had proven to be an excellent cook. "It'll be nice having a home-cooked meal for a change," he thought, his mood brightening. Susan despised the lengthy journey through the rural landscape, recognizing its necessity. Both she and Grant couldn't afford to be identified while they were exploring opportunities together. It wasn't just the duration of the drive that troubled her. It was also passing by the small, dilapidated houses along the way. I used to live in a place exactly like that, she thought, and the memories flooded back. Her father had abandoned the family when she and her sister were in elementary school. Forced to relocate, her mother struggled to afford a rented shack on a maid's meager wages. The girls' schoolmates were no better off, yet they relentlessly bullied the sisters. Despite the challenges, Susan excelled academically. She earned high grades throughout high school, securing a full scholarship to the University of Pennsylvania. Education, she believed, was the way out of poverty, a means to achieve the same lifestyle enjoyed by her wealthier peers at UPenn. Although her classmates were not unkind, the socioeconomic disparities were undeniable. While they partied at fraternity and sorority events, Susan studied in her dorm. While they vacationed in Europe, she worked on campus during the summers. During her junior year, Susan caught a break when she captured the attention of a charming economics teaching assistant, Daniel Morgan. Though he was well on his way to a doctorate, he was far from a stereotypical nerd, possessing a good sense of humor and a love for socializing. Despite the rules against relationships between TAs and undergrads, the regulations were easily overlooked, given his focus on economics and her pursuit of fine arts. Susan had already experienced some dating and ventured into a few intimate encounters. However, she was determined to improve herself, and understood that acquiring a reputation as a promiscuous person on campus wouldn't lead to success. Now, when faced with the opportunity for a relationship with a man who had a promising future, she did everything in her power to make it happen. He stood no chance. A man with a future, she scoffed angrily. She had initially expected Daniel to join a major investment bank or a consulting firm that actively recruited on campus. When he revealed his aspirations in academia, she felt quietly disappointed. Nonetheless, she consoled herself by imagining he might eventually head a significant institution, supported by online research that showed several university presidents with backgrounds in economics. 7 years into their marriage, however, she found herself living in an unremarkable university town with a husband, contentedly teaching at an equally unremarkable university. "This isn't the future I wanted," she cursed. In this seemingly bleak environment, she secured a fundraising position for a local museum, housed in a converted mansion once owned by a Pennsylvania oil baron. Once again, she became beholden to a group of affluent women and their obsequious offspring, listening to their gossip and catering to their imperious demands. But she vowed to herself that this wouldn't be her reality for long as she steered her car toward the small rural motel where she and Grant first met. "I've discovered a new path to climb." Before Daniel could step out of the car at his father's house, the front door swung open and a burst of youthful energy in the form of a small boy came rushing towards him. Senor Daniel, will you play soccer with me?" Marco shouted. "Marco!" Paloma shouted from the porch. "Leave Senor Daniel alone. He's been teaching all day and he's exhausted." Before disappointment could cloud the little boy's face, Daniel gestured to his mother. "It's all right, Paloma. Come on, Marco. Let's see your skills." And so, they began playing, maneuvering the grass-stained soccer ball through dribbles, passes, and shots. While they raced around the yard, Daniel noticed Paloma had fetched his father to watch them. The elderly man, though unfamiliar with soccer, enthusiastically cheered them on. They only paused when Paloma called them in for dinner. Marco protested, but Daniel was content to stop. "I'm not fit enough to keep up with that boy, especially playing soccer." Anticipating a traditional Latin American meal, Daniel was pleasantly surprised when Paloma served a Mediterranean-style dinner. Chicken kebabs over basmati rice with a Greek salad and pita bread on the side. Ezra grumbled about craving a hamburger, but Daniel observed that he cleaned his plate. They enjoyed the meal as a family, discussing the day, their plans for the week, and other casual topics that lifted Daniel's spirits even more. It dawned on him that he hadn't thought about Susan since his arrival. While clearing the plates, Paloma leaned in and whispered, "Just so you know, I try to stick to a Mediterranean diet with Senor Morgan whenever he allows. I want to keep his heart as healthy as possible." "Thank you, Paloma. Whatever you're doing seems to be effective. I haven't seen Dad this energetic in a long time." After putting the dishes in the dishwasher, they all gathered in the den. As the conversation continued, Daniel noticed Marco becoming quiet. He chuckled, thinking even 7-year-olds can get tired after playing so hard. Paloma also noticed and took Marco to his room. By the time she helped him get ready for bed, he was halfway asleep. However, as soon as he was settled, his eyes popped open. "Mama, can Senor Daniel come say goodnight?" "We don't want to bother him," she said sternly, then relented. "But I'll ask." Daniel was pleased with the boy's request and followed Paloma back to Marco's bedside. To his surprise, the boy hugged him before lying back down and closing his eyes. "Good night, Marco," Daniel said affectionately, tucking the blanket around the boy's shoulders. "Buenas noches." Returning to the den, Daniel saw his father had also drifted off. He assisted Paloma in getting him back to his bedroom and into bed, realizing with a start how little his father weighed. After returning to the den, Daniel thanked Paloma for the meal and mentioned he would head home. "Won't you stay a little longer?" she asked, reaching for his arm before hesitating. Can you tell me a little about the painting in the living room?" "Of course," he responded, trailing behind her as they entered the adjacent room. Displayed prominently on the wall in a specially designed frame was Andy Warhol's Sage Blue Marilyn Monroe. The frame was safeguarded by shatterproof glass and securely fastened to the wall. Special pressure-sensitive pads were positioned beneath each corner of the frame to detect any alterations in pressure between the wall and the artwork. On the opposing wall, 2 small units emitted infrared beams, scanning for any objects approaching the piece. "I assume my dad has briefed you on the security measures," Daniel remarked, and Paloma nodded. "That's why I don't permit Marco in here," she clarified. Once he bounced his soccer ball against the wall and almost immediately a security unit was dispatched to investigate. She shook her head. "We won't repeat that mistake. But what I'm curious about is how your father came to possess such a unique painting. It's an interesting tale. My grandfather worked as a printer in Germany before World War II. He managed to escape just before things took a turn for the worse and arrived in America with only his name. Well, he lost a part of that too. Some immigration clerk on Ellis Island changed Morgenstern to Morgan. Anyway, my grandfather found employment as a printer in New York City and brought his son, my dad, into the business to learn the trade. My father became fascinated with silkscreen printing, gaining popularity for artwork in the early 1960s. To cut a long story short, he ended up apprenticing for the company that printed many of Andy Warhol's silkscreens. Allegedly, Warhol noticed my dad working late one night and took a liking to him. On a whim, he gave him the artist's proof on the wall and even signed a dedication on the back. That's quite a generous gift from Warhol to someone he barely knew. I concur, but it's essential to recall that during that period, Warhol was selling his silkscreens for just a few $100s. At that time, he probably didn't perceive an artist's proof as particularly valuable. It wasn't until later that the value of Warhol's works began to soar. But isn't it risky to keep it here? Not many people are aware that my dad owns a Warhol and it has never been appraised. However, with the recent publicity surrounding the auction, we couldn't ignore the potential risk. That's when my dad implemented all these security measures. I won't claim they're foolproof, but as you and Marco discovered, even touching the wall triggers a swift response from the security team. She gazed at the painting again. I can see why your father wants to keep it here. He must be incredibly proud of it. He is, Daniel affirmed, and I'm equally proud of him. Paloma smiled and nodded. A bit later, Daniel hopped into his car to head back to the old Victorian-style home provided by the university on campus. As he drove away, he glanced back at the light streaming through the windows of his father's house. I wish it were as bright at my place, he sighed. Susan was frequently absent these days, and even when she was there, the atmosphere felt chilly. He shook his head and drove away. As Susan exited the motel, she still relished the delightful sensations of post-intimacy contentment lingering between her thighs. She mused happily, noting that there's nothing quite like a satisfying encounter to help one unwind. Grant Nicholson, she reflected, was indeed an adept partner, partly because he was undeniably infatuated with her. His passion exuded from every pore, and in the bedroom he eagerly sought to bring her to climax time and again. However, as she departed from their modest love nest, her thoughts veered towards her husband. It wasn't that Daniel was a subpar spouse or lover. He certainly wasn't. Yet, he lacked the ambition and drive she craved. Grant thrived on socializing with wealthy individuals on the board, excelling at it. In contrast, Daniel found contentment in attending university gatherings and mingling with fellow faculty. Each time she had to participate in such events, a deep desire to scream overwhelmed her. She tightened her hold on the steering wheel. However, the moment his father passes away and Daniel inherits, I'll file for divorce immediately. Once I receive my share from the Warhol and the house, I'll have a fortune comparable to those wealthy women, not to mention having a high-profile husband. As she drove into their driveway, a disdainful expression crossed her face. University housing. I suppose I can tolerate this shabby place a bit longer. And my husband, too. The next time Daniel encountered Paloma, her smile was absent. After completing the grading of an exam, he heard a knock on his office door. Startled, he looked up to find the young woman standing there, and the expression on her face raised his concern. What's wrong, Paloma? Has something happened to my dad? Is Marco okay? She entered hastily, closed the door behind her, and took a seat in one of the chairs by his side. Your dad is fine, Daniel. My mother is looking after him and Marco while I'm here. But... He shook his head impatiently. So what's wrong? What's going on? You're aware that I have a large family in this area, right? I didn't, but go on. One of my sisters, Christina, works at Birch Grove. She's the secretary to Senor Nicholson, the executive director. Okay. Anyway, Christina sees Mrs. Morgan at the mansion every day. Yes, but... Daniel, I'm so sorry, but your wife and Senor Nicholson are having an affair. Her words hit him hard. His initial instinct was to reject the possibility, not wanting to believe it. However, considering the current state of his relations with his wife, he quickly realized how an affair would explain the ongoing situation. Regaining control of himself, he leaned forward in his chair. How does your sister know this? He asked intently. Paloma looked miserable. We have a cousin who works as a maid in the Pocono View Motel. It's north of here, about 20 miles en route. He waved his hand impatiently, and she hurried on. Your wife and Senor Nicholson, they meet out there almost every week. The last time was 2 days ago, the night you had dinner with Senor Morgan, Marco, and me. He clenched his jaw, recalling that night and Susan's late arrival to bed. Despite his frustration, he maintained a calm and controlled tone. Paloma, this is a serious matter. I can't simply trust the word of someone I've never met, even if she is your cousin. I understand, but you don't have to rely solely on her word. Is it possible? Could you come with me to check it out now? 30 minutes later at the motel, Paloma introduced Daniel to her cousin Lourdes, who had limited English proficiency. With Paloma translating, Lourdes guided them to a maintenance closet along the main hallway of the motel. She opened a door to the ventilation system and retrieved a hidden recording device. Daniel looked at Lourdes, then at Paloma. How did this end up here? He asked with a growl. While our family was together, Christina shared her suspicions about Senor Nicholson and his frequent meetings with Senora Morgan. When she showed us a photo, Lourdes recognized them as the couple who regularly visits the motel, Paloma explained. She gazed at Daniel, pleading, I'm sorry, Daniel, but I needed to uncover the truth. I gave Lourdes the recorder. I hope you won't hate me for this. Ignoring her unspoken question, Daniel pointed at the device. Have you listened to this? He demanded. She lowered her head. Yes, I listened to part of it. Lourdes played it for me when she called. That's when I knew I had to tell you. All right, Daniel said grimly. Tell her to play the tape. When Lourdes pressed the button with the arrow, the sudden volume startled all three of them. "Oh my God, Grant, there, yes, don't stop, ah," echoed from the small speaker. Lourdes quickly stopped the playback and spoke to Paloma. "Do you want her to start from the beginning?" Paloma asked Daniel. A pale-faced Daniel shook his head. "I don't—" "No," I recognized Susan's voice. He rubbed his temples. "I really don't want to have to hear the whole damn thing, Let's just go on from here." The cousin adjusted the volume and then pressed play. Initially, they heard only the rustling of sheets and the groans of the bed springs. Shortly after, the conversation between the lovers resumed. "God, Susan, you're incredible. I just can't get enough of you," Grant Nicholson's admiring voice echoed. Then his tone became almost urgent. "Honestly, baby, I don't want to wait any longer. Just give the word and I'll divorce my wife tomorrow. All I want is to be with you." "No!" Susan's voice sharply rang out. "Don't you understand, Grant? We can't do anything until Daniel's father passes away. Once he's gone, and Daniel inherits the Warhol, then I can divorce him. He'll have to auction it off as part of the settlement, and I'll get my half of the proceeds. After that, you can say goodbye to Greta, and we'll finally be together." "Are you sure you can get half of the Warhol? I thought inheritances were protected." Susan's voice carried a smirk. "Don't worry about that. I've got a shyster who knows how to get around that. And since he gets paid based on the size of the settlement, I can guarantee you he's highly motivated." "Yeah, but how much longer do we have to wait?" Nicholson whined. "Be patient, baby," Susan reassured him. "The old man is going downhill fast. We'll get what we want soon enough." Daniel angrily reached over and stabbed the off button with his finger. What a conniving person. She's got this whole thing figured out. He slammed his fist down on the counter, frightening the two women. Then he turned and walked out of the motel. Paloma quickly embraced Lourdes before snatching the recorder and rushing out to the parking lot. There she found Daniel standing by his car, lost in thought. When she approached, he turned to her, his eyes reflecting both the anger and despair of someone betrayed. "I put in so much effort, Paloma. I knew she wasn't happy in our marriage, but I kept trying to improve things," he lamented. His expression darkened. "Now I understand why nothing worked." His voice became resolute. "Get in the car, we need to head back to town." Sitting in the passenger seat, she timidly spoke. "I hope you're not upset with me, Daniel. I just felt you should know what she was up to." He shook his head. "I'm not mad at you, Paloma, but Susan has a lot to answer for." Concerned, she asked, "What are you going to do? You're not planning to harm her, are you?" He glanced at her. "Yes, I intend to confront her and Nicholson," he replied, his tone firm. Seeing her worried expression, he clarified, "Not in a violent way, but they won't like the consequences." Reaching over, she took his arm. "I don't want you getting into trouble, Daniel. I just couldn't." He offered a small smile. "Don't worry, Paloma, everything will be okay." Then his smile faded. "While you handle your mother and Marco, I need to talk to my dad." Sadly shaking his head, he added, "He was thrilled when I married Susan, impressed with her. He couldn't wait for us to have children. When he hears the truth, he'll be just as upset as I am." With a wry expression, he looked at Paloma. "It's ironic, isn't it? I used to get frustrated when Susan delayed starting a family, but now I'm grateful we didn't." The rest of the drive passed in silence, each lost in their thoughts. The conversation with his father was lengthy and painful, but they eventually devised a plan of action. Daniel's first move was to file for divorce to thwart Susan's plan. His dad pledged to consult his attorney for a divorce lawyer recommendation. He also advised his son to avoid giving Susan any hints about his newfound knowledge. "I can manage that, Dad," Daniel assured him. "I'll just keep my distance until I'm ready to serve her. Given how little time we spend together already, that shouldn't be too difficult." To conceal his emotions, Daniel dedicated much of the weekend to campus activities, such as grading papers and updating lesson plans, attempting to ensure that his academic life wouldn't be significantly disrupted by the impending divorce. When his father referred him to an attorney on Monday, Daniel promptly reached out to schedule an appointment. However, he was disappointed to discover that he couldn't meet with the attorney until Thursday. Although he briefly considered searching for another lawyer online, he ultimately decided against it, realizing that he needed a highly skilled advocate if Susan attempted any legal maneuvers. When Thursday finally arrived, Daniel was relieved that he had exercised patience. His new attorney appeared competent and confident, reassuring him about the potential outcome regarding his father's painting. "I believe I understand your wife's intentions, but I genuinely don't think you should be concerned about your father's Warhol being included in any property settlement, as long as we file promptly," she assured him. She pledged to have his case ready for filing the following week and could prepare the writ for service later that same day. As he headed back to his campus office, Daniel felt a sense of relief for the first time since discovering Susan's betrayal. "We're almost there," he thought, hoping to resolve not only his divorce but also the matter involving Mr. Grant Nicholson with a bit of luck. The phone call he received on Sunday shattered his sense of security. Upon answering, all he initially heard was the woman sobbing. "I'm so sorry, Daniel. I tried so hard to help him, I really did." A chilling sense of dread gripped him. "Help who, Paloma? What's happened?" "It's Senor Morgan," she cried, then paused. "I have to go. The EMTs are here." The line went silent. Springing to his feet, Daniel rushed to his car and raced to his father's house. The street was blocked by a fire truck, an ambulance, and another vehicle from the fire department. Parking down the street, he sprinted toward the house, arriving just in time to witness the EMTs wheeling a gurney out onto the front porch. "Is he okay?" he asked anxiously. The technician looked at him. "Are you the son?" Yes, I am. Is he alive?" The man slowly shook his head. "I'm sorry, there was nothing we could do. He was gone when we got here. His heart had stopped beating. It looked like he'd had a massive stroke or an aneurysm." "But what about defibrillation? Could that help?" The man looked at him sympathetically. "I'm sorry, sir, but even if we could restart his heart, there'd be nothing else working, you understand? You wouldn't want that, and neither would he." As they loaded the gurney into the ambulance and drove away slowly, Daniel could only stand there in shock. Finally, he forced himself to trudge into the house. When Paloma saw him, she ran to him and threw herself sobbing into his arms. "I'm sorry, Daniel. I tried so hard to bring him back. I did chest compressions until the medics arrived, but it wasn't enough. I'm so sorry." Through his own tears, he held her away from him so he could look into her face. "It's not your fault, Paloma. You did everything you could. I talked with the EMT outside. He told me Dad must have had a stroke or a cerebral aneurysm. He was probably gone before you even got to him." She bowed her head onto Daniel's chest, tears streaming down her face. "He was sitting at the table chatting with me. Suddenly he clutched his head, complaining of pain. Then he just collapsed and fell to the floor. Oh, Daniel, it was dreadful." Gently guiding the distressed woman to a chair, he went to fetch water for both of them. Upon his return, he inquired, "Where's Marco?" "Marco? Madre de Dios. I almost forgot. He's at school. I need to go get him." She started crying again. "Marco will be devastated. He truly loved your father." With that, she hurried away, leaving Daniel alone in the now eerily empty house. He sat there for a long while, grief overshadowing his attempts to grasp the sudden upheaval in his life. While he knew his father's health was deteriorating, he wasn't prepared to lose him so abruptly. Tears welled up again, and there was no one there to console him. Eventually, he gathered himself enough to make a list of people to notify and tasks to complete. Once he had documented everything he could think of, he began the somber task of making phone calls. After reaching or leaving messages for the most urgent contacts, Daniel secured his father's house and drove to Birch Grove to carry out the last task he had postponed. Despite his reluctance, he had decided to deliver the news to Susan in person. "I want to see how she reacts," he thought bitterly. Surprised to see him entering her small office, she reacted appropriately when she heard the news, expressing the expected sorrow. However, as he observed her, he had to restrain himself from expressing his anger. Those are fake tears, he fumed inwardly. She must be thrilled because now she can proceed with her plan. Nevertheless, he managed to control himself until he left. The moment he departed, Susan eagerly rushed out of her office, practically skipping down the hall to share the news with Grant Nicholson. Grant, taken aback by Susan's sudden appearance and the news she blurted out, began offering condolences automatically. However, she cut him off. "Can't you see this is good news? It's what we've been waiting for. With the old man gone, Daniel inherits the estate. I can file for divorce, settle the property, and once it's finalized, you and I can be together." Grant's excitement mirrored hers. "I can't believe the waiting is over, so when do you plan to file for divorce?" After a moment of thought, she replied, "I don't want to seem heartless. I'll wait until after his father is buried and the memorial service is over before filing." "That makes sense," Grant agreed. "But don't wait too long. Remember, it might take a while for me to sort things out with Greta." The following days for Daniel were consumed by the somber duties associated with a death. His primary and most urgent task was arranging his father's funeral. Despite his father not being particularly observant, he had left instructions to be buried according to Jewish traditions, necessitating the organization of the interment for the next day. Once the details for his father's interment were settled, Daniel took on the responsibility of coordinating a memorial service for those unable to attend the burial, including friends and neighbors. With no other living relatives, Ezra had formed numerous friendships over his career, and many came to pay their final respects. Daniel's own friends and colleagues also attended, offering condolences and support, providing some solace amidst the grief. Both the interment and the memorial service proved emotionally challenging for Daniel, not only due to the sorrow he experienced, but also because he was obliged to share these moments with Susan. Despite her flawless portrayal of the grieving wife, Daniel understood her true feelings, fueling his resentment into a profound hatred. Amidst all this, Daniel's new attorney reached out, seeking guidance on his divorce filing. Overwhelmed with various responsibilities, Daniel requested a hold on the divorce proceedings. "I'll need to get back to you," he informed her. "My life is quite chaotic right now." After the memorial service concluded, an unforeseen complication emerged. Back at his father's house, Paloma inquired about when Daniel wanted her and Marco to relocate. Daniel was shocked. "You can't leave, Paloma. Firstly, you have nowhere to go, and I have no intention of kicking you out onto the street. Moreover, if the house remains empty, it might attract thieves or vandals. Besides, moving elsewhere would likely mean transferring Marco to a new school. He's doing well where he is, and I don't want to risk disrupting that. You have to stay at least for a while." Paloma gratefully accepted, recognizing that Daniel's kindness and concern played a significant role beyond the reasons he provided. With his father laid to rest and the services completed, Daniel then reached out to his father's attorney to understand the necessary steps for handling the estate. The list of tasks related to the probate process was extensive. After reviewing them with Daniel, the attorney added an unexpected responsibility. Ezra, the attorney informed Daniel, had requested an expedited reading of the will, even before going through probate. Additionally, Daniel's father had left a list of people to be invited. Hearing the list, Daniel understood. "I have one request," he told the family attorney. "To make the reading of the will as formal as possible, can we hold it in your law office? If it's conducted there and your office issues the invitations, I believe it's more likely that everyone who should be there will attend." The old man readily agreed. On the scheduled day for the will reading, Daniel and Susan arrived at the attorney's office separately. Seated around the small conference table in the law library, they exchanged greetings with a strained politeness. Despite their limited time together, mainly during Daniel's father's services, Susan, though outwardly calm, seemed brimming with excitement. In contrast, Daniel appeared composed and unperturbed. Shortly after, Paloma entered, introducing herself to the attorney. Susan, looking at her in disbelief, leaned over to Daniel, demanding, "What's she doing here?" He met her gaze emotionlessly. She was invited. Before Susan could react, Her surprise heightened as Grant Nicholson walked in. "You were invited too?" she asked. He nodded. "I'm not sure why, but the invitation was quite clear." At that moment, the attorney stood up, signaling for attention. "May I have your attention, please? It seems that everyone who was invited is present. The late Mr. Morgan explicitly wished for each of you to be here for the reading of his last will and testament," he announced in a resonant voice. "I won't burden you with a detailed reading of all the legalities. Instead, Mr. Morgan wanted me to cut to the chase." He cleared his throat. "Firstly, the late Mr. Morgan appointed Daniel Morgan, his only child, as the executor of his will. Daniel will be responsible for settling any owed taxes, outstanding debts, or other obligations. Once these matters are resolved, he will oversee the distribution of the estate's assets according to his father's stipulations and wishes. Daniel has agreed to take on this role and, I'm informed, has already commenced the process of settling the estate's debts, taxes, and other obligations." Susan cast a quick glance towards Grant, offering him a brief smile filled with anticipation. "This brings us to the distribution of assets," the lawyer continued. "The initial bequest pertains to Mr. Morgan's residence, where he spent the last 27 years of his life, along with the land it occupies. According to his will, I hereby bequeath my home and its grounds to Paloma Contreras, in appreciation of the extensive service she provided during my time of illness and need. I also allocate any remaining funds in my checking account to assist her with covering expenses." "What?" Susan exclaimed in surprise. "How can he leave his house to that maid? It should go to Daniel." "Yes, you're correct," Paloma interjected, regaining composure after her surprise. "It's meant for Daniel, not me." She sought support from Daniel, but he refused to meet her gaze. "Nevertheless," the attorney pressed on, "the late Mr. Morgan was explicit about his wishes. Now, if I may proceed to the second bequest?" Once the group hushed, the attorney continued. "The second bequest pertains to the Andy Warhol displayed in my living room. I hereby bequeath the Warhol to the Birch Grove Mansion and Museum to be a part of its permanent collection." "Oh my God!" Nicholson exclaimed. "No, that's all incorrect," Susan shouted. "He can't do that. The Warhol was supposed to go to Daniel." "I regret to inform you, Mrs. Morgan, but Mr. Morgan specifically bequeathed the Warhol to Birch Grove," the attorney stated. "He wishes it to be prominently displayed in the museum." "But that means Daniel gets nothing," Susan exclaimed. "His father cut him out of the will? How could he do that? It's not fair." "Ladies and gentlemen," the attorney announced loudly, "if I may have your attention, I have not finished reading the terms of the bequest. Please be informed that the second bequest Mr. Morgan made is conditional. The will states, 'My gift to Birch Grove is contingent upon the completion of two requirements. First, Birch Grove must immediately and permanently sever any and all professional relationships with Mrs. Susan Morgan. Second, Mr. Grant Nicholson, the executive director of Birch Grove, must immediately and permanently terminate the liaison he has been conducting with Mrs. Susan Morgan. In the event that either of these two requirements is not fully met, ownership of the Warhol is instead to go to the Warhol Museum in Pittsburgh." He gestured towards Grant Nicholson. "If you're curious, sir, I've sent notification of this conditional bequest to Pittsburgh just before this meeting. I understand that the Warhol Museum will be closely monitoring your compliance with these requirements." "This is absurd," Susan exclaimed. "That intrusive old man has no right to interfere in our personal lives." She turned to Daniel. "This is all you're doing, isn't it? You're trying to deprive me of what's rightfully mine." "I would never do that, Susan. In fact, I have what's legally yours right here." With that, he handed her the envelope he had brought to the meeting. She tore it open and stared at the contents as if they were in a foreign language. "What is this?" "That's your legal notice that I've filed for divorce," he said. Then, taking out his iPhone and snapping a photo to document his action, he added grimly, "Susan Morgan, you have now been served." "You scoundrel, you can't divorce me. I'm divorcing you," she screamed. Daniel just smiled. While she was yelling, Susan hadn't noticed that Grant had quietly left the room. When she finally realized he was gone, she hurried after him. Meanwhile, Paloma was trying to reason with Daniel. "This isn't right, Daniel. Senor Morgan should have left his house to you, not to me. You are his son. It's not fair that you have nothing." Now Daniel smiled. "Paloma, it's okay. My dad and I talked about this. He loved you and Marco and wanted to ensure you were taken care of when he was gone. He knew I understood, and that this was what I wanted too." He took her by the shoulders and looked at her carefully. "Don't you see? He was a gruff, old-fashioned man who had a hard time expressing his feelings. He didn't know how to convey how much he appreciated the care you gave, the companionship you provided, and the way you didn't take any of his nonsense. This was his way of expressing his love." She wiped away fresh tears. "Marco and we loved him too, Daniel." Susan sprinted down the Birch Grove hallway to reach Grant's office. Disregarding his secretary, she burst into her boss's room. Breathless, she exclaimed, Grant, this is fantastic news. With the addition of the Warhol to its collection, Birch Grove will attract a plethora of new visitors. You'll be at the helm of the most esteemed art museum in the area." "Thank you, Susan," he responded cautiously. "I believe you're correct. And once everything settles," she continued, "our relationship won't have to be kept a secret anymore, just as you've always wanted." His expression tightened. "Did you not hear the condition the old man's will attached to his bequest?" he asked sharply. "That can't possibly be legally binding," she retorted. "It might stir up gossip among the country club crowd, but it'll blow over quickly." "Except for the Warhol Museum," he countered. "They'd love to incorporate such a significant piece into their collection, so they'll be monitoring us closely." The tremor in her voice exposed her anxiety. "But as I mentioned, that can't be legal. No court would enforce such a requirement." Now Grant became agitated. "Do you really expect Birch Grove to go to court against the Warhol Museum? Do you comprehend the resources they possess? The Carnegie Foundation backs them. If they litigate, the legal expenses could bankrupt us." He rose from his seat and handed a set of documents to his ex-lover. "I regret to inform you, Susan, but I've already discussed this matter with Mr. Worthington. Starting today, you are no longer employed at Birch Grove. Grant, you can't do this. Not after everything we've meant to each other." Her voice then grew more intense. "Besides, you wouldn't want me to reveal our affair to your wife." "I've already come clean to her," he replied to Susan coldly. "Once I finish here, I'm going home to continue apologizing. Hopefully the status of being the wife of Birch Grove's executive director will help mend her wounded feelings. Now, it's time for you to vacate the estate. We'll ensure your severance check is sent to you." She stood there glaring at him with anger, her fists clenched by her side. Instinctively, he took a cautious step back, fearing she might lash out. Instead, she spun on her heel and marched away, making her way down the hallway to her former office. Quickly gathering a few personal items, she then exited. Passing by her secretary's desk, Evita inquired, "Are you leaving, Mrs. Morgan?" "Yes," Susan replied without even looking at her, as her heels echoed on the marble floor. Evita called after her, "Adios, puta." Then she hurriedly went to Christina's desk to share the recent events. Daniel was searching through the fridge for dinner when the jingling of keys at the front door caught his attention. Stepping into the living area, he observed Susan entering with a sullen expression on her face. Upon spotting her soon-to-be ex-husband, her demeanor shifted to anger. "This was all you're doing, wasn't it? How long have you known about Grant and me?" "Long enough to disrupt your little plan," he retorted. "So you convinced Ezra to alter his will," she said bitterly. "He was going to leave everything to you and you persuaded him otherwise. Why would you do that?" "Because I wanted to ensure you'd never lay hands on it no matter what. When I learned about your scheme to declare the Warhol as community property, donating it to Birch Grove prevented that. Additionally, it gave me the leverage to thwart your affair with Grant. I figured his affection would fade quickly if he had to choose between you or the Warhol." "So you really despise me that much?" He looked at her incredulously. "After what you attempted? You're absolutely right," he shouted. She stared at him, taken aback by his intense anger. After a moment, he regained composure. There's one thing I need to know. Did you ever love me? She sighed and slumped into an armchair. I think I did initially back when we first got married. You were so dynamic, so full of potential. I thought you'd climb the ladder and take me with you. She shook her head, her lips forming a bitter expression. Imagine my disappointment when I witnessed the path you opted for instead. It wasn't long before I began searching for a better opportunity. So it's always been about money and prestige for you. Love and a good life weren't sufficient. How very Norman Rockwell of you, she smirked. Don't you know that's what losers choose when they lack what it takes to win? Family, friends, community, those represent your concept of losing? What I desire is respect, the kind that money and position afford you. That's what matters. The rest is just window dressing. He started to argue, then decided it wasn't worth it. So what happens next? Her bravado had vanished. I'm leaving. Thanks to you, my reputation in this town is ruined. As soon as I can pack what I need, I'll be gone. And don't worry, assuming we split assets fairly, I won't contest the divorce. All I want is half our savings and half the proceeds from the house. Sorry, Susan, you're forgetting we don't own this house. It belongs to the university. She ground her teeth. You always were so smart. Why couldn't you have been more ambitious? Without waiting for an answer, she went to the bedroom. After a while, she emerged with a suitcase, garment bag, and cosmetics kit. I'm leaving now, she told him. I'll have my attorney contact yours and we'll get the divorce done as quickly as possible. She gave him a baleful look. At least we agree on one thing. We both want this marriage over with. He looked at her curiously. So where are you going? As far away from here as I can, somewhere where I can start over. Hopefully with someone a little more aggressive. Daniel watched her go. Good riddance, he thought with satisfaction. For once, Susan lived up to her promise and their divorce proceeded without complications. Daniel resented paying alimony, but with his soon-to-be ex-wife unemployed, he couldn't argue much. It's a small price to pay to be free of her, and even smaller when you consider what she was attempting against you, advised his attorney. Meanwhile, managing his father's estate as the executor kept Daniel occupied. Each day brought new tasks, distributing death certificates, halting his father's Social Security, notifying the IRS and filing a final 1040, placing legal notices for creditors, and more. After classes, Daniel often found himself at his father's house sorting through accumulated possessions, handling bills, and managing his father's finances. To his surprise, he discovered his dad had exclusively used paper checks for payments. Until he could transition to electronic payments, Daniel found himself writing more checks in a few weeks than he had in several years. Though the work was time-consuming, it provided Daniel the chance to spend time with Paloma and Marco. His campus residence felt dim, while his father's home radiated with light and vitality. Working late into the evening and sharing dinners with them became a regular occurrence. Daniel felt guilty about imposing, but Paloma insisted he stay, even after resolving his father's affairs. It's challenging to cook for just the two of us, she argued, and he happily obliged. Being part of their family proved to be a healing balm for the sorrow of his father's passing and the bitterness of his failed marriage. A few weeks later, Daniel received a call from his father's lawyer. The probate court has approved the final assessment of your father's estate. You are now free to distribute his assets according to his wishes. Really? I thought probate usually took months. The elderly man chuckled. Normally, you would be correct, but it appears your father's will has been prioritized. Perhaps it's related to the influential figures on the Birch Grove board. It seems they are eager to acquire their new prize. Regardless, you can proceed now. An hour after the attorney's call, Grant Nicholson contacted Daniel to inquire about the expected date for Birch Grove to take possession of the War Hall. As you may be aware, the museum and I have fully complied with the terms of your father's will. Now that it has cleared probate, we are keen to proceed with the transfer. Although the legal obstacles had been resolved, a new complication emerged. The museum curator insisted on using her own team to pack and transport the silkscreen to Birch Grove. However, the handover needed to be coordinated with the security company, which had to carefully disconnect all protective devices and systems. Safely removing the artwork and decommissioning the various systems proved to be a complex task. It would take most of a day for the two groups to complete the transfer. As Nicholson awaited progress reports in his office, he felt like a child on Christmas Eve. By the following morning, Birch Grove would be in possession of the most valuable artwork they had ever owned. To mark the occasion, the museum planned a private showing for the board of directors and special guests the following evening. The awkwardness of his affair with Susan was now in the rear-view mirror, and ahead the future for the museum and its executive director looked promising. After coordinating with the security company to safeguard his father's house during the Warhol transfer, Daniel decided to take Paloma and Marco on a day trip to the Poconos. They hiked along a scenic trail, enjoyed lunch at the Flagstaff Lodge, and took a ride on the Lehigh Gorge Scenic Railway. Upon returning home, everyone had left except for a security guard. The living room was neat, with furniture back in place, but Marilyn Monroe's smiling, posturized face was conspicuously absent, leaving all three feeling its loss. Attempting to lighten the atmosphere, Daniel came up with an idea. "It's too late to cook dinner. How about ordering some pizza?" The suggestion was well received, and soon they were sharing several large pizzas. After the heavy meal and a day full of activities, Marco was already asleep and Daniel carried him to bed. As Daniel headed for the front door, Paloma asked him to stay the night. With the security systems gone, she felt safer, and he could sleep in his dad's room. Initially reluctant, Daniel eventually agreed after a long day. When Paloma went to her room to sleep, Daniel, clad in his t-shirt and boxer briefs, lay down in his father's bed. Memories and the unfamiliarity of the bed kept him awake initially, but he eventually drifted off to sleep. However, he was later awakened by a sound in the hallway. As he sat up, wondering if it was his imagination, the noise repeated. Suddenly, the shadowy figure of Paloma appeared, tiptoeing over, slipping under the covers beside him. As he began to speak, she gently covered his mouth with her hand. "Please, Daniel. It's been so long for me, and I've been so lonely." Removing her hand, she replaced it with her lips. In an instant, his objections were forgotten, and he responded to her kiss with a passion that overwhelmed them both. His left arm wrapped around her, embracing her closely, while his right hand reached for the straps of her nightgown to release her breasts. Simultaneously, her hands were occupied sliding beneath the waistband of his underpants, attempting to pull them down. He promptly sat down, removing his underwear, and assisted her in taking off her nightgown over her head. It had been a considerable amount of time for him as well. At this point, his instincts took control, guiding him deep into her warmth. They both savored the delightful sensations, rolling over and repeating the process in a rhythmic acceleration, fueled by long-suppressed desire. As the climax approached, he sensed her gasp. "I feel it, Daniel. I feel it. Now, please now." With that, they both reached the peak of a sexual crescendo, clinging to each other in the aftermath of exhilarating pleasure. The following night marked the celebration of the Warhol installation at Birch Grove. Grant Nicholson had arrived early, leaving his wife to arrive separately, stating, "It's better for you to make a grand entrance." As he was going through the checklist for the festivities, he was surprised by a knock on his office doorframe. Glancing up, he saw the troubled expression of the museum's curator. "What's the matter?" he demanded impatiently. "Sir, there's an issue with the Warhol," the woman said uneasily. "What? It's not damaged, is it?" "No, sir, nothing like that. It just doesn't seem quite right." "Doesn't look right? What do you mean?" "It's just that some of the colors don't appear as they should." "It's an artist's proof," Nicholson exploded. "It's not meant to look perfect." The curator winced but stood her ground. "And Warhol's signature, sir, it hasn't faded as it should. I mean, he would have signed it in the 60s. The ink should have faded." "Is that what's bothering you? How do you know what kind of ink Warhol used? Go back and ensure everything is ready, and the guests will be arriving any minute." The woman didn't back down. But that's not the main issue, sir. The problem is, well, it's the wrong size. What? Yes, sir. Warhol's Marilyn Monroe is 36 by 36 inches. I double-checked to be sure. A proof would have to be the same size, but this print is only 35 inches square. Worthington's mouth fell open. So what are you exactly trying to say? The curator appeared on the verge of tears. Sir, this print is a counterfeit, a fake. There's no way it's genuine. Oh my God, exclaimed the museum director, sinking back in his chair as he struggled to grasp the gravity of her revelation. Are you certain? He implored. Yes, sir, I'm sorry. He gazed silently into the distance, shocked by the unfolding situation. Sir, the anxious curator interrupted. What should we do? Should we proceed with hanging it anyway? Are you out of your mind? Nicholson yelled, causing the woman to flinch. If people discover that we deliberately displayed a fake artwork, it would spell the end for Birchgrove. He shuddered and then pointed at the curator. Take the piece down and conceal it. Instruct your team to turn off the lights and put up a sign saying "Event Cancelled." When the woman hesitated, Nicholson shouted, Do it! Do it now before it's too late. The curator hurried off, and Nicholson slumped back, contemplating the disaster that had befallen him. A thought struck him, and he rushed to his secretary's desk. Call the guard at the front entrance and instruct him to lock the main gate. Quickly, quickly. She paused fearfully. What should I tell him to convey to the guests? Simply state that the event has been cancelled due to an emergency. No additional information. Now hurry, and refrain from making any more phone calls. Understood? The anxious young woman nodded, but before she could reach for her phone, it began to ring. Sir, she said, it's the curator again. Would you like to speak with her? What does she want now? He asked rhetorically while the secretary anxiously waited. Fine. I'll take the call in my office. You contact the gate on the other line and ensure no one else gains entry, he instructed. Back at his desk, Nicholson answered the phone and the curator began speaking rapidly. It's the caterer, sir. He's inquiring about what to do with the food you ordered. Tell him to take it back, Nicholson erupted. We certainly don't need it. I already attempted that, sir, but he insists he can't. It's already been arranged on the tables, and he claims it's against the law for him to retrieve it now. Damn it, then instruct him to deliver it to the homeless shelter. Even the champagne and caviar, sir. Just get it done, he snapped, slamming down the receiver. Slouching in his chair, Nicholson rested his head in his hands, attempting to devise a solution to the catastrophe. This can't be happening, he muttered repeatedly. Could you please enlighten me on what the heck is going on? Came a familiar voice. I had to walk all the way from the front gate to get up here. Appalled, the stressed director looked up at the flushed face of his chairman of the board. Adrenaline surged through Grant's system as he desperately sought a way to pacify the irate man. Actually, Mr. Worthington, we've managed to avert a disaster. When issues arose with the Warhol, I knew you wouldn't want the celebration to proceed. What do you mean by a problem with the Warhol? The executive demanded, leaning menacingly toward Nicholson. Sir, it appears that the print is a fake, a forgery, sir. A fake, Worthington shouted. How on earth could you have accepted a fake? You people are supposed to be the art experts. Didn't you think to inspect it before launching the PR campaign and bragging to the world about your achievement? I understand, sir, that the situation may appear unfavorable, but there were complications with the will, and we had to coordinate with the security company to ensure its safe arrival. You should have witnessed the extensive security measures the elderly man had in place. Enough, Worthington bellowed. As it stands, Birchgrove will become the subject of ridicule in the art world for years to come. I believe I speak for the board when I say you are responsible for this disaster. Consider yourself terminated effective immediately. Once you navigate through the traffic jam you've caused, exit these premises and do not return. Before Nicholson could voice a protest, Van Worthington turned and marched away, ignoring the frightened receptionist at the desk. Oh God, my career is over, the former executive director lamented. No museum in the country will hire me after this gets out. As he sank into self-pity, his secretary approached. "Sir, there's a call for you," she said nervously. "I've told you," Nicholson snapped. "No more phone calls." "I apologize, Mr. Nicholson, but it's your wife. She insists that if you don't speak with her, don't bother coming home tonight." Defeated, Nicholson conceded. "All right, connect her." As the call connected, Greta's anger was palpable. "You better have a damn good explanation for this, Grant. I've been stuck in a traffic jam for who knows how long. People keep asking me what's going on, and as the executive director's wife, I'm just as clueless. If your intention was to humiliate me, you couldn't have chosen a better way." Pausing to catch her breath, she demanded, "So what do you have to say for yourself?" "It's quite simple, dear," Nicholson replied calmly. "While hanging the Warhol in the exhibition hall, we discovered that, well, it's a fake." "A fake?" she exclaimed. "Unfortunately, we had to cancel the exhibition since displaying a forgery was not an option. It's regrettable that we only discovered the issue at the last minute," he explained. Pausing for a moment, he accepted the situation and continued. "It's also unfortunate that in such circumstances, someone ends up being the scapegoat, whether it's their fault or not. Despite my contributions to Birch Grove, Van Worthington has immediately relieved me of my responsibilities." She gasped. "Worthington fired you? This is truly unbelievable." Taking a deep breath, she addressed him. "Grant, over the years I've tolerated a lot from you, including your questionable affair with that person you hired as the development director. I've turned a blind eye too many times, but this is beyond my limit. Do not return home tonight or ever again, except to collect your personal belongings. My lawyer will file for divorce first thing in the morning. Do you comprehend?" He sighed, displaying the defeat of a broken man. "Do you comprehend?" she reiterated. "Yes, dear." As the call ended, he dropped his head to the desk, feeling completely defeated. Paloma learned about the disastrous events unfolding at Birch Grove and the termination of Grant Nicholson from Christina. When she hurriedly shared the news with Daniel, he received it with satisfaction, though not surprise. "I warned you I would retaliate for what he did to my marriage," he remarked. She looked at him inquisitively. "But how could you have known this would happen?" "I didn't, well, not exactly. But I orchestrated things in a way that made it likely for him to self-destruct," he grinned. "I couldn't predict the public and humiliating manner in which he did it, but I was pretty confident about the outcome regardless. After what he and Susan attempted, I believe he got what he deserved." Paloma scrutinized him. "So what exactly did you do, Senor Daniel? I still don't understand." He smiled. "Come with me to my office at the university. That way, I can show you." Once in his cluttered office, he gestured for her to sit before taking a seat himself. "Let's discuss Susan first," he began. "As you know, her plan was to keep her affair with Nicholson a secret until my father succumbed to Parkinson's disease. Dad was deteriorating rapidly, so she was confident she wouldn't have to wait too long. She couldn't file before Dad's passing because she needed me to inherit his estate, ensuring she'd get half of everything. His house was valuable, but the real jackpot was, of course, his Warhol. I'm not sure what legal maneuver she had in mind, but her attorney was confident he could argue the Warhol as communal property. After the settlement, she'd walk away with half the auction value, a significant sum. But thanks to you and your cousin discovering her affair and upon learning about Susan and Grant's scheming, I spoke with Dad. I knew he intended to leave the Warhol to me. However, after hearing Susan's plans, I persuaded him to leave the artwork to Birch Grove. Not only would it be safely out of her reach, but we could use the bequest as leverage against her. He smiled. And it worked. When Grant realized Birch Grove would only get the Warhol by severing all ties with my wife, he dropped Susan like a hot potato. Daniel became reflective. He expressed uncertainty about Grant's true feelings for Susan, suspecting she had used him to climb the social hierarchy. Regardless, she soon realized the depth of his commitment. When my father's will was disclosed, Susan lost her job, her lover, and naturally her marriage to me. Everything unfolded just as I had anticipated. By the way, a friend informed me recently that Susan has relocated to Allentown. Apparently, the only job she could secure was at a telemarketing center selling insurance. Instead of progressing up the ladder, my ex-wife has experienced a significant downfall. It's perhaps the most fitting punishment I could have wished for her. Paloma acknowledged, I understand how you retaliated against Susan, and in my opinion, she received the consequences she deserved. Cheating on your husband is already bad, but scheming to exploit you and your father, that's horrible, she emphasized, using the Spanish pronunciation. But what about Nicholson? What did you do to him? Daniel grinned. You're aware of what transpired at Birch Grove last night, right? Well, I know some of it. Mostly I was just shocked to discover your father's artwork wasn't genuine. A hint of sadness appeared in her eyes. I'm somewhat relieved Senor Morgan didn't have to hear that cruel news. Daniel looked at her appreciatively. It speaks volumes that your initial concern is for my father. He stood up from his seat. But don't be too disheartened for him. Reaching behind a filing cabinet, he retrieved the Marilyn Monroe teaching aid used in his intro course and placed it on the desk. She gazed at him with uncertainty. There's a saying by a renowned author that the best way to safeguard something is to conceal it in plain sight. Allow me to demonstrate something. He flipped the print over, revealing the reverse side covered in brown paper. Delicately, he peeled the paper away, unveiling an inscription. To Ezra Morgan for all his hard work, Andy Warhol. Is this the genuine print? Paloma exclaimed. But this is the one you use in your classes. You mentioned that. It's just sitting here in your office. Daniel smiled and nodded. But when did you make the switch? The other print was hanging in your father's living room long before Marco and I moved in. In fact, it was well before you discovered what Susan was planning. And given all the security Mr. Morgan had, how could you have swapped it? Daniel grinned. Initially, Dad didn't think his print was worth much. After all, Warhol initially sold his screen prints for only a few $100s each. But as the value of Warhol's work soared, Dad grew concerned about having an authentic artist's proof in his home. We discussed it, and I proposed swapping the genuine item for a cheap print. I'd keep the actual Warhol here and use it in my lectures so no one would suspect its value. He would display the reproduction on his living room wall. Later, as Warhol's value continued to rise, Dad came up with the idea of installing security to protect it. He thought no one would question the authenticity of a work safeguarded by all those security measures. It became a game for him, always searching for more high-tech gadgets to protect it. Daniel flashed a smile at Paloma. Luckily, there was never an attempted burglary, but I'm convinced that all that security made Nicholson believe he was dealing with a genuine article. So you switched the prints before I started working for your father? Exactly. I planned to switch them back when Dad eventually passed away. However, after finding out about Grant and Susan, I saw an opportunity to get back at both of them. After that conversation with Dad, he had his attorney revise his will to ensure Nicholson would break up with Susan. I then let Grant take the fake Warhol, anticipating he would want to flaunt his prize as quickly and publicly as possible. As expected, he took the bait. Like Susan, he lost his job, marriage, and reputation. So, what's the plan now? I intend to let the chaos at Birch Grove settle down. Once it does, I'll discreetly inform the board that I discovered the real Warhol in a storage container I didn't know Dad had. After they verify its authenticity, I'll request it be displayed with a plaque commemorating my dad's connection to Warhol. Don't you feel guilty about not keeping the Warhol for yourself? It was quite valuable. He grinned at her. Honestly, I don't feel guilty at all. I never wanted the responsibility of owning an important piece of art. As for the money, Susan was the one craving wealth and status, not me. Seeing what it did to her, I'm content to be rid of it. His smile widened. Moreover, I hope all of this helps me achieve a more significant goal. She looked at him uncertainly. What goal is that? To become part of a new family. What did you just say? What new family? Daniel stepped around the desk, taking her hands in his. A new family with you, Marco, and me. As the graduate student observing Professor Morgan and Paloma in each other's arms quietly retreated, she called a fellow student. Remember how concerned we were about Professor Morgan after he lost his dad and wife? Well, I think our favorite prof is going to be okay. My name is Bob, and what I've been through I won't wish on even my worst enemy. I faced betrayal. My wife Charlotte is a beautiful and very smart woman. I always trusted her, and it seemed to me that this was my love for life. How deeply I was mistaken. I will tell you how it all happened and how I took revenge on my unfaithful wife and came out victorious. It was exciting. Enjoy watching. I've always been a trusting, unassuming guy, and my wife Charlotte had an independent streak that I admired. And we caught that spark. She was my engine, and I trusted her completely. Unfortunately, my whole world in pink glasses collapsed when I discovered emails in my wife's laptop a couple of weeks ago. These were not just letters from friends or colleagues. They were intimate and very frank messages with photos attached to them. I read them all, and the very first letter was received when my wife and I celebrated 2 years of our marriage together, and we have been together for 5 years. It was a shock, akin to buying a new car and realizing that premium oil has been leaking from it since the second day. Charlotte and I discussed starting a family, but this revelation threw me into an emotional stupor. This discovery made me pay attention to strange absences, unusual phone calls, and the persistent smell of cologne, which was definitely not mine. Charlotte went to the gym, had hen parties, and did manicures, but suspicions about her marital fidelity crept in. At first I thought it was a mistake. It can't be. But if I'm already on the trail, then I need to go all the way. Disappointed, I decided to investigate and hired a private investigator. The discovery was disastrous. Charlotte had a relationship with not one, but 2 other men, one of whom was a gym lover, and the other was a manager at a large donut chain. I felt a mixture of anger toward Charlotte and disbelief that these 2 affairs on the side were spontaneous. She clearly did not mind, and this upset me the most. After all, if she was being chased by some guys and she turned them down, then it wouldn't have lasted for 3 years. It just simply doesn't make sense. Then Charlotte detonated a bomb, saying she was expecting a baby, and all I could think about was the uncertainty of fatherhood. It was like being handed a winning lottery ticket only to realize that it had expired. Divorce was inevitable, but I needed answers about impending fatherhood. Revenge brewed within me, and I contemplated various scenarios, from confronting the 2 men to winning back Charlotte's affection and dropping her later. However, I wanted a peaceful life after the storm. I decided on a measured, calculated revenge, turning the situation against the 2 men who were infatuated with Charlotte. I planned to set them up, making them suspicious and ensuring my own freedom from the anger, betrayal, and constant urge to check Charlotte's phone. In essence, I considered going full Ocean's 11, manipulating their infatuation to serve my purposes. The goal was to achieve revenge in a way that ultimately allowed me to move forward and build a peaceful life, free from the constant reminders of betrayal. Manipulating emotions, planting doubts with fake emails and insinuating texts, it's a cleaner, legal, and just as devastating method as a physical confrontation. Divorce, once a spine-chilling term, has become my guiding North Star, leading me to sanity. Though I'm not eager for the process, it's a necessary hurdle. I have a reliable lawyer, a clear objective, and, crucially, the truth on my side. With this support, I'll navigate through. The bigger question looms about the baby. Is it mine? Or am I potentially caring for someone else's child? The answer will shape my future. I've arranged for the test, and all that's left is to wait. Regardless of the outcome, I'm determined to carve out a peaceful life, perhaps rediscovering my guitar or working on that novel I always spoke of. When the dust settles, I might dip my toes into the dating world again. For now, there's a revenge plot to unfold, a divorcee to finalize, and a paternity test to nervously await. It's a messy situation, but they say calm follows the storm, and I'm prepared to weather it. In the first update, a few days have passed since my elaborate plan took shape. With a new digital identity, I connected with my wife's gym enthusiast boyfriend, posing as a fitness newbie seeking advice. Slowly introducing photos of Charlotte and the donut guy, I expressed faux sympathy, suggesting it's a shame for her to be with someone like him. The ball started rolling, and I guided the gym rat to the scene of Charlotte's alleged betrayal. Creating an anonymous tip-off with precision, I orchestrated the chaos. Sitting in my car, I recorded the spectacle as Jim Rat confronted Charlotte and the donut guy. The atmosphere became tense, reaching a breaking point. The Jim Rat charged, but the donut guy, surprisingly agile, sidestepped and delivered a punch that sent the Jim Rat staggering. The donut guy, though lacking a Greek god physique, exuded confidence, dodging further attacks like a seasoned boxer. In the midst of airborne donuts and the shocked reactions of onlookers, the donut guy, against all expectations, managed to bring down the Jim Rat with a decisive blow, sending him sprawling across the linoleum. Sweat glistened on the victorious donut guy's face as he stood there, breathing heavily, while the Jim Rat struggled on the floor. It felt like a real-life Jerry Springer episode with the ripped Jim Rat, the donut guy, and my wife caught in the middle. Caught off guard, my wife's face turned pale, her mouth agape, and then her eyes met mine. Charlotte's gaze was empty, her face ghostly white. She stammered and sobbed, pleading in the middle of Dunkin' Donuts, a scene almost as embarrassing as the day I discovered those incriminating emails. Although I maintained composure, my insides were in turmoil. I want a DNA test and a divorce, I calmly declared, my voice steady. If it's my child, I want full custody. The look on her face was almost satisfying. She was cornered and helpless. Her sobs grew louder as the two men stared at her in disbelief, obviously wondering who I was. Then, I posed a question. I wonder how these guys found out about each other. And walked away, laughing. It played out almost cinematically as she stared after me, tears staining her cheeks and her world crumbling around her. When she eventually returned home, she was a wreck, her voice barely a whisper.
How did you know?
She asked. Disappointment, sour and bitter, overwhelmed me. I didn't say anything. Words weren't needed. Instead, I went into our room, took a pillow and a blanket, and threw them at her feet. The door clicked shut behind me, locking up my past and hopefully opening the way to a better future. It was just the beginning, but I knew I'd been through the worst. After all, every storm leads to clear skies, and I was ready to step into the sunlight. The weeks following the donut shop fiasco were a whirlwind of legal paperwork, tearful confrontations, and a very revealing paternity test. The paternity of the child was confirmed, and it marked the end of a tumultuous chapter in my life. It turned out that the baby wasn't mine. It belonged to the donut guy, the unexpected winner in this complicated love triangle. Charlotte, perhaps attracted by her candied Romeo's newfound confidence, began dating him, perhaps in a desperate attempt to find stability among the rubble. Surprisingly, the divorce process with Charlotte went smoothly. She did not dispute it and did not ask for anything, perhaps out of guilt, humility, or harsh awareness of the situation. I packed up my things and moved closer to my hometown, to a quiet suburb, within reach of the hustle and bustle of the city. My parents were delighted, and my sister's children liked that their cool uncle was around more often. It was a different, more peaceful life, but exactly what I needed. The Jim Rat, after his public humiliation, became a mystery, disappearing as if the earth had swallowed him up. Maybe he found another marriage to interfere with, or maybe the incident served as a wake-up call. Anyway, everything turned out fine. Life threw me an unexpected blow, and I dodged it, although not without bruises. It served as a lesson, reminding me of the importance of caution and wisdom. Despite the storm that swept through my life, I was grateful because it could have been much worse. Instead, I became stronger, wiser, and more determined, ready to start a new chapter and leave the storm behind for calmer and brighter days. I am relieved that I went through the chaos, dodging several bullets along the way.
How do you like the story? Write your opinion in the comments. Tell us what you would do if, God forbid, you found yourself in a similar situation. I think that a man did the right thing. You need to be able to let go and not get attached to people so much. He did not choose a cruel revenge. He did not spoil his wife's life. He showed her what the consequences could be. Now we move on to the second story. It is short, but also no less interesting.
On a Wednesday afternoon, I collected the kids from school, enduring the lengthy school pickup lines that resembled the winding paths of Disneyland. Gradually making my way to the front, I finally reached Dustin and Sarah, my 13 and 14-year-old kids, who at this age made it clear they weren't fans of public displays of affection. They had entered the stage where I served as their chauffeur, ATM, and personal food provider. Wednesdays were my responsibility due to Lisa, my wife, having her weekly project review. To my surprise, I spotted Lisa's car in the driveway, pondering if she had left something behind, given that there was no reason for her not to use the garage. After parking, the kids hurried out, raiding the refrigerator. "Hey, take it easy, you two. Save some room for dinner," I called out. Leaving my briefcase on the floor, I entered the living room to find Lisa curled up on the couch under a blanket. I inquired, "Hey, baby, what's going on?" She responded,
"I don't feel well. My stomach is acting up and I'm having some issues."
Wondering about the cause, I asked, and she suggested it might be some kind of flu. I then inquired why she wasn't in bed, and she explained,
"I was, but I had an accident. Could you please change the sheets?"
Swiftly realizing the situation, I headed to the garage, equipped with a nose clip and latex gloves, recalling the days when the kids occasionally had accidents. Although they had outgrown such incidents, the tradition persisted, and they only climbed into our bed when feeling worse than the dog. After managing the unfortunate mishap, I ordered pizza for dinner and took a much-needed shower, spraying ample air freshener, fervently hoping not to catch whatever ailment Lisa was dealing with. A week passed involving suffering and cleanup duties, and it became clear that Lisa needed to consult our family doctor. The initial doctor visit yielded predictable answers, mentioning the possibility of flu and advising to wait. 2 weeks later, Lisa returned to the doctor due to persistent symptoms. Having lost a significant amount of weight, she avoided eating, relying on energy drinks as her primary sustenance. The doctor conducted blood tests, but nothing warranted further action. In the subsequent weeks, Lisa struggled to adapt to her situation, resorting to adult diapers and baggy clothing to conceal her discomfort. My responsibilities expanded to include grocery shopping, with online orders preferred to avoid using a list. While the children and I yearned for weekend activities, Lisa rarely felt up to joining us. Consequently, we began doing things without her, and our intimacy and personal life suffered. It was understandable. Romantic activities weren't appealing with the risk of unexpected troubles. As time passed, Lisa's condition showed no improvement, and she eventually became a recluse, working from home. The challenges extended beyond her health, affecting our family dynamics and daily routines. Continuing to work from home and rarely venturing outside, Lisa's weight continued to decline. Even when feeling sporadically better, it rarely lasted through the weekend. The children became engrossed in their sports schedules, oblivious to Lisa's absence from their games. Life unfolded as usual for years, with Dustin graduating from high school and preparing for college, while Sarah soon followed, leaving the nest after an early graduation. The day after Sarah's high school graduation, I approached Lisa, expressing the need for a conversation. Puzzled, she asked,
"Okay, what's going on?"
I informed her of my decision to file for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences. Her initial shock turned into anger as she questioned,
"Did you cheat on me? How can you do this to me?"
Calmly, I explained that the kids had grown up and it was time for me to move on.
"How can you leave now? I never stopped loving you,"
she lamented. I disclosed Dennis Wilson's name, and her eyes widened as tears streamed down.
"You knew?"
she asked. I clarified that it wasn't about knowing but waiting until the kids left for college, as it was more cost-effective to support her while they were at home. Lisa pleaded,
"That was years ago. We've been through this. I'm sorry. I made a mistake and shouldn't have done it. Cry me a river of tears."
I responded, "Right or wrong, you did it and felt no remorse. You even contacted him again once you felt better." After moving out, Lisa unexpectedly experienced an improvement in her health. Freed from the same intestinal problems, she realized that I had been the cause of her misery. We sold the house, divided the profits, and therapy became inevitable. The outcome remained the same. I preferred to take my chances on a fresh start than remain with a known cheater.
What conclusion can you draw? Write your opinion in the comments and which story you liked the most. As a support, please like and subscribe to the channel. I will be pleased. Bye.
My name is Bob. I'm 48 years old and I'm a trucker. I had a happy marriage, but everything changed overnight, during which I lost not only my family but also my job and the house that I bought with my saved money 10 years ago. And I'm ready to tell you my story, how my wife's infidelity ruined my life. As a truck driver, the road has become my second home. The hours behind the wheel merged into one endless stream. The scenery passed like a fog. New people and places appeared every time. Sometimes I had to sleep right in the cabin, wrapped in a blanket from the cold. There were endless traffic jams from accidents or roadwork when all I wanted was to reach my destination. However, it was always nice to stop for the night at a motel, take a hot shower, and sleep in a soft bed. Being a trucker was both a challenge and an opportunity. Thanks to this job, I was able to provide a good life for my wife Melissa and our beloved daughter Nancy. I tried to be home as much as possible to spend time with my family, though sometimes I had to miss important events due to another long-haul trip. When I came back, they always awaited me eagerly at home. Nancy would come running with cries of joy, hugging me tight and telling me everything that had happened. Melissa welcomed me with a warm smile and a delicious dinner after a long journey. It's hard to say our relationship was a happy one. I decided to marry Melissa when I found out about the sudden pregnancy, and I didn't have much choice. Melissa was studying to be a nurse and didn't want to drop out of college, so I started working as a trucker to help pay for her education and support our family. The job didn't allow me to spend much time with Melissa, so passion and romance had long left our life, but respect and care remained. When Nancy was born, my life changed dramatically, and I found true love in the form of my darling daughter. She became a ray of sunshine in my life, which mostly consisted of countless long roads and passing landscapes outside my truck window. I didn't come home just for a tasty dinner, a soft bed, and a hot bath. I came home for the happiness of seeing Nancy. She always greeted me first, hugging my tired shoulders. I would lift her up, holding her tight to my chest and kissing the top of her head. Even when I was exhausted after a long week, chatting with my daughter revived me. We loved spending time together, going to the zoo, riding carnival rides, playing different games. I read Nancy bedtime stories and told her about all the places I had visited. She always shared school news with me and trusted me with her secrets. When I was away, she missed me terribly and called every evening before bed. I knew that my hard work allowed Nancy to live in comfort and joy. Her love inspired me to keep up with the grueling job of being a trucker. If my life was the cosmos, then my beloved daughter was the sun around which all other planets revolved. Now that Nancy has turned 18 and started college, making new friends and learning independence, she seems so grown up. But to me, she will always be my little girl. Even now, when I come home late at night, she still greets me with a smile and a warm hug. This cozy tradition has remained unchanged over the years. Melissa isn't home because she works the night shift at the hospital and doesn't expect me to be back. I take off my jacket and shoes and go to the kitchen to eat and have some tea after work. Nancy thoughtfully reheats food in the microwave and puts the kettle on while I tell her about my trip to Oregon. I talk about the rocky cliffs, gorgeous Crater Lake, Smith Rock State Park, the magical Tokadee Falls, and the mighty Mount Hood. It would be great to take the whole family on vacation there to enjoy the stunning scenery and wilderness together. Nancy listens silently, making no comment about my suggestion. "So, how are you and Mom without me?" I asked with a grin, expecting to hear how much they had missed me. Instead, Nancy's eyes filled with tears. "What happened?" I asked, alarmed. I always had a hard time dealing with others' tears, let alone my daughter's. The girl suddenly sobbed and hugged me, pressing her head to my chest, just like when she was little.
"It's bad at home without you,"
Nancy said quietly. Her words shocked me. It turned out that while I spent my days on the long, monotonous roads, my wife had started inviting a strange man home. Iron said he was just a coworker and friend, but his presence made Nancy uncomfortable. He acted provocatively, walking around shirtless, putting his feet on the couch, laughing loudly, and making crude jokes. He would take others' belongings without asking, flipping through my books, rummaging through my tools in the garage, and opening kitchen cabinets. Haley asked him not to touch anything that didn't belong to him, but the man just laughed it off. His presence in the house made Haley feel unsafe. It was as if this was no longer her home, but the home of an uninvited guest, behaving as if he were the owner here. Nancy locked herself in her room when he came over, but could still hear his booming laugh and chatter with her mom. It upset her terribly that her mother acted so rudely with a stranger around when their home used to be so orderly, cozy, and harmonious. The situation worsened when her daughter said that this man entered her room without knocking, rummaged through Haley's things, and asked inappropriate questions about her personal life. He also made lewd comments about her attractive figure. Despite my daughter's attempts to discuss the problem with her mother and her request not to invite this person, but all her requests went unheeded. Since this man appeared, my wife has stopped paying any attention to Haley, communicating only with him. My daughter no longer felt safe. In my dreams, I envisioned my return, hoping to restore the old ways. I firmly believed that I wouldn't tolerate such behavior in my own house. When suspicions arose about my wife Melissa cheating with another man, the ground gave way beneath my feet. The anger and fury that overwhelmed me manifested in clenched fists. I paced around the house, desperate to release my pent-up rage by smashing or breaking something. However, Nancy's frightened look momentarily tempered my anger. I decided to play it smart, aiming to catch my wife in the act and confront the stranger who dared to intrude into my home and harass my daughter. I texted Melissa, claiming I was delayed on the road and wouldn't be back for several days. I booked a room at a nearby motel, just a block away. The plan was simple. If the lover came over again, Nancy just had to call me, and I would rush back immediately. Fortunately, I didn't have to wait long. After only 2 days, my daughter called. I raced back home to confront my adversary, barely containing my trembling from the tension and adrenaline. I silently slipped into the house through the back door, skillfully approaching the bedroom where the sound of a woman's laughter and a man's voice emanated. After a few moments of anticipation, the bedroom door flew open with a bang against the wall. I witnessed the lovers kissing, interrupted by my sudden entrance. There was no doubt anymore. My wife was being unfaithful. Melissa looked frightened, as if unable to believe her husband was there. The stranger, wearing only pants, glared at me with suspicion and obvious annoyance.
"Who are you?"
he asked rudely, as if I were the intruder. I replied, and my fist connected with the man's face. The next minutes blurred into a red haze of fury. My fists found their target on their own, his face, ribs, gut. At some point, the despised man lost consciousness, collapsing motionless to the floor. Breathing heavily, I looked at Melissa. Her face showed shock and horror.
What have you done?
She whispered bitterly. Tears of hurt and disappointment welled up in my eyes. I felt so lonely, betrayed by my loved one. Coming to her senses after the initial shock, Melissa hastened to call an ambulance. The agonizing minutes of waiting until the welcome sound of sirens neared seemed endless. The medics quickly examined the lover and loaded him onto a stretcher. Melissa and I accompanied him to the hospital, where he was admitted for observation, while we had to wait outside. We had never felt more awkward next to each other. Silently, I sat staring at the floor, replaying the evening's events in my mind. Why did I finally ask my wife? We talked for a long time that night. She confessed she hadn't felt loved for so long. I was constantly traveling, and at home, I devoted all my attention to our daughter. As foolish as it sounded, she was jealous of Haley and craved affection too. She wanted to spend more time together, but I, her worn-out husband, had no energy for that. Though we lived under the same roof, my long hauls and her night hospital shifts meant we barely saw each other. The lover made her mundane life more bearable, helping her cope with loneliness. Luckily for the two of us, the diagnosis was just a concussion after that fateful night. Melissa and I decided to separate. Our marriage, built on obligation rather than love, was broken long ago. We filed for divorce and split assets evenly. For me, this was a heavy blow. I had devoted so many years to this marriage, yet never found domestic bliss. Parting with my wife of so many shared years caused bitterness. But for our daughter's sake, I knew I had to move on. Melissa left the home filled with too many painful memories. Having moved to another city where her mother lived, she started over with a clean slate. She worked hard to numb the loneliness, eventually met a new man and married him. Though it wasn't easy for me to forgive my former wife, for Nancy's sake, we maintained civility. The girl sometimes visited her mom in the other city, but no matter how Melissa tried to reconcile, Nancy felt like a stranger in her new family. Her true home was always my house, where she was truly loved. Though life had tested our resilience, it only brought Nancy and me closer together. We could always count on each other and were genuinely happy together.